G'day, ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today, we're going to have a look at the IS-7, which, for me, is just nice. It's just overall nice. I'll get to why in a little bit, but first, I thought we might talk about the map that we're on. Advance to the Rhine. Really nice map. I think it's reasonably well balanced, and it just so happens to be favored in the Russian side. Why is it favored in the Russian side? Because it's urban, it's flat, and it's small. Now, Russian tanks are notorious for having poor gun depression, and in general, the Russian playstyle is you just push. You are just aggressive and keep pushing and don't stop until every last enemy is dead, which is a really fun playstyle. I remember a match that I played in my T62 like 2 years ago, where literally we just pushed all match. We just did not stop. We pushed until we reached the enemy spawn, and we killed them as they left their spawn. Now, that's just the way Russians play. And we're on a map that I guess favors the way that the Russians play. And that's just the way it goes, I guess. There are maps that favor the Germans, such as Mozdok, and basically any map with more than 5 degree steep hills, and pretty much anything else that has hills or is not only urban. So Poland, for example, where you can snipe on the hill. There's a map for everyone, and that's one of the beautiful things I like about War Thunder. There is quite literally a map for everyone's playstyle. And my playstyle happens to be playing aggressively and shooting Leopard 1s on the move without a stabilizer. God, I love that shot. That's just bias straight there. I can't get enough of stuff like that. And I just love doing that. I love being aggressive. Because there's nothing quite as amazing as being aggressive in a slow tank like a mouse. You saw how readily I pushed up in my mouse video. If you haven't watched it, go and check it out, by the way. Now, being aggressive in a tank like the IS-7 means that you need to make your shots count. And whilst I did make my shot count, I also got hit. The Leopard almost made his shot count, and I almost died right there. Now, the IS-7 isn't really the best for reload times. I mean, this crew isn't experted, so it's kind of hard. But the IS-7. Let's talk about the IS-7, actually, because when it was introduced, there was a lot of hype about it, because in World of Tanks, it is, I believe, a tier 10 heavy tank. So it sits right up there, whereas in War Thunder, we have, T-80s, Abrams, that will literally just lol pen this thing for days. And it really doesn't sort of stand up to any significance, the IS-7, compared to the Abrams. So I think the IS-7, personally, is a nice addition to War Thunder. It existed in real life. I don't see why it couldn't be added to the game. It's not really a production tank, and the Russians don't really need a tank between 7.7 and 8.3 because they have the IS-4M, they have the T-10M, and there is really no gap there. Like you could be really nitpicky and say, well, there's an 8.0 gap. But realistically speaking, the IS-4 can actually fill that gap. And on top of that, there aren't really many matches in 8.0 specifically. Unless you get really, really unlucky and get faced up against XM1s, which does happen from time to time, but it's not really a major concern, to be quite frank. The IS-7, personally, is not overpowered to me. You can pretty readily kill it with HeatFS, and if you don't really have HeatFS, there are tanks that, there are tanks that can work ways around it. You can kill this thing frontally with an RU-251. You just have to shoot the right spots. You can also take out the breach. I believe you can take out the breach with APDS. Do correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And I believe you can also hesh the hatches, which, albeit is a little bit unreliable, but there are ways around this thing, and whilst it is big, fast, heavy, if you take out the breach, it's pretty much gone. There's nothing else it can really do apart from run away, which is what I did. And I got really lucky in that original stage of the match. There's really only a few things that I could possibly do there. Now, the IS-7 is also a rare event tank. So, you could only get it during, I believe, the winter event. No, the summer event, sorry. I've got my seasons confused around the wrong way. Because, just Aussie things. Anyway, the IS-7 is now only available on the market for sale. And to be honest, I don't mind that. Because the tank itself isn't terribly overpowered. It's not terribly overpowered. It's not overpowered at all. It sits at 8.0, where pretty much HeatFS can pen it pretty readily. There are guns that outmatch it as you go through the tiers. Guns like the XM1, on the L7, of course. The Leopard 1 A1 with its APFSDS and HeatFS. And then you've also got the ability to flank it and several other counters. It's not invincible, and it certainly isn't overpowered. And as a result, I think it's a really, really nice addition as a reward tank. The IS-7, for me, just seems to be one of those sort of fun things. It's just kind of cool. And it doesn't fit the game. It doesn't have a place in the regular tree, for lack of a better phrase. It sort of sits in that really, really nice spot where, it's there if the players want it. And, if you're into Russian heavies, which this thing is pretty much just a standard Russian heavy. There's not really a whole lot to the IS-7. And realistically, it's just another Russian heavy. But in saying that, there are some perks and there are some things that make it unique, and that's why people find it worth buying. That, and it's rare. And I believe it's a premium? No, it's not a premium. That's one of the things I like about the IS-7. It's just unique. It's got some little quirks, it's got some little fun things, it's kind of cool, and it's kind of funky. But at the end of the day, it is just another Russian heavy. There is nothing terribly unique about it apart from the armor and the autoloader, and the gun, of course. But in terms of playstyle, it essentially just plays like any Russian heavy tank. You look for an enemy target, you shoot it, you pull back, wait to reload, and go again. You avoid tanking too many shots because it's bad for you, and you just try and play with your speed, essentially. Now, the IS-7 doesn't have amazing top speed, but nor does any Russian heavy tank in soft terrain like this. It does have decent forward acceleration, which means that you can push aggressively at the beginning of a match, which is just characteristic of another Russian heavy. And most of the time, you'll find that if you're too aggressive, you can get taken out by things like an STB-1, which is slinging Hesh or Heat, or a Leopard 1, or if you get really, really unlucky, XM1s. Now, in this match, I believe I'm down tiered again, and it's pretty much a ruffle stomp because the enemy team doesn't really know what they're doing. They make too many mistakes, they're out of position, and speaking of out of position, if you look closely at the minimap, there's only one tank supporting me, and I'm just pushing ahead. I am just literally YOLO charging ahead. I wouldn't recommend this in a heavy tank at all. Heavy tanks are designed to sort of stick with the team, and if you don't stick with the team, you tend to either get left out in the open or you just don't get any kills because you're sitting too far behind the enemy team. Too far behind your own team. Now, with the IS-7, what I'm doing is I'm continuing this aggressive push and I'm going over the ridgeline, which, it is what it is. You shouldn't be cresting ridgelines in Russian tanks at all because of their poor gun depression. But, luckily for me, this Leopard 1 doesn't see me, and I overmatch his upper front plate, which is lovely. Splendid news, because that guy was camping the C point, and that means that my team can go and get the C point. That's one of the beauties I love about the IS-7. It just has that surprise factor. You can sort of push up and, Ainsley Harriott style, yeah, boy, and just put a 130 into the upper front plate. There's something satisfying about that, but it's not anything different from what you can do with a T10M. It just, I guess, different shell, slightly lower battle rating, and not much else changes. I guess maybe a higher reload, but for the most part, I would compare the IS-7 and the T10M. They're very, very similar tanks in functionality and the way they play out. Even penetration-wise, the T10M is just 30 millimeters off with its stock shell. So there isn't a whole lot. One of the things I do love about the IS-7, though, is its pseudo-stabilizer, which allows you to do stuff like that. I guess there's just something just immensely satisfying about Russian tanks, being able to pull stuff like that. I mean, it's not just Russian tanks either. It's basically any tank with a pseudo-stabilizer, which is essentially just the tank being fat. The tank is fat, and so the gun doesn't bounce. That's pretty much the long and short of a pseudo-stabilizer. It doesn't actually have stabilization like a Carnarvon or a Centurion. It more sort of just bounces up and down less. And for me, oh, you know what? I'll take that. That's kind of nice. It's just convenient, I guess. One of those little things that just, adds a little bit of spice. I mean, you can do that with a T10M, but there's not a lot of difference between the T10M and the IS-7 for me, from what I can tell. But, the IS-7 still has its little perks. Look at it. It looks monstrous. It looks sort of brutal. Whereas the T10M looks sort of scary. Like, the T10M will stab you in your sleep, but the IS-7 will bowl you over in a bar and beat you while you're on the curb. That's the kind of feel that the IS-7 gets. And whether that's from World of Tanks or whether that's from its look and reputation in War Thunder, that's to be debated. But for me, the IS-7 is a good collector's vehicle, and pretty much that's it. It's not terribly unique for me, but if you want to collect Russian heavy tanks, by all means, this is a great tank. And if you love your Russians, throw a talisman on this thing, and you'll enjoy yourself a fair bit. For me, again, it's just one of those things. The Russian heavy tank playstyle really isn't my thing, although being aggressive is really, really, really nice and really cool. For me, the way that Russian heavy tanks play with a slightly longer reload and a lot of armor, but not a lot of, I guess, mobility. And you might say, well, look at you, you're doing like 45 kilometers an hour. Surely this is mobility. But more specifically, I'm referring to just the general way it traverses terrain. The IS-7 needs to get up to speed, whereas a tank like the Leopard 1 can quite literally do 60 kilometers per hour right off the bat on sand, for example. That's where the IS-7 falls short, I guess. It's just... I feel like it lacks something. There's something missing in the IS-7 that I get from other tanks a lot better. And whilst I'm not a heavy tank driver, I'm more of a medium and light tank driver. I prefer that playstyle. There's something about this particular heavy tank and the way this particular tank plays that stumps me a little bit. I'm really not sure what it is. But for me, the IS-7 is just a little bit odd. It doesn't quite fit, your standard definition of a heavy tank. Although, I guess it fits the standard definition of a Russian heavy tank. I'm not really sure where the difference comes from, and it's just one of those things. It's quirky. It's quirky, and if you love little quirks like that, this tank is really, really nice. But for the most part, just for me, and I guess for the ordinary player, it's just another Russian heavy. Nothing terribly special, but at the same time, it's unique, it's rare, it's prestigious. And on the marketplace, it is very expensive. Now, that's pretty much game for me in that IS-7. 5 kills, or 6 kills including the plane, and an overall decent result just by being aggressive. That's what happens when a team works together, I suppose. But again, if enemies are caught out of place, if they're caught with their pants down, a bit unlucky, that's kind of what happens. And Hand of Stalin is always there to guide. So, ladies and gents, if you're looking for Russian bias, IS-7, that's one thing. That's what I couldn't put my finger on. It's that Stalinium, There's one thing, It's there. It's the Russian bias. I knew it. I knew it. That's the quirk. Bias. And we all know it, and we all love it. Just kidding. Of course, we all know that there is no Russian bias. But, yeah, IS-7. Interesting tank, kind of weird, kind of funny, kind of unique, but kind of the same as well. Anyway, ladies and gents, that's game, and that's it for the IS-7. Until next time, take care, and I'll catch you next time.